Thank you all very much for coming. I just can't believe the crowd we have here. It's a fantastic response from Richmond, and a big thank you to you all for coming. And I'd like to just mention, actually, that this is, or this month, I'm not sure what the day is, the first anniversary of the Exchange, this community centre in Richmond, which is a fantastic resource we have, and I'm absolutely feel privileged to be able to run this event here. So I'm Daphne Cotton, as you may have gathered. I know you're probably familiar with my name and not my face, but I hope I will meet some of you afterwards. I'm an ambassador for the Wave Trust 70/30 campaign, the goal of which is to reduce child maltreatment by 70% by 2030. And if the messages from resilience were to be acted upon in every borough in the country, I believe that in 10 years' time, we could be well on the way to meeting that goal. So that's it from me. We're going to watch the film, and we'll be back up here after the film. Right, you've seen the film. But before I introduce our panel, I just actually would like to pay tribute to James Redford for producing this film. It's not that we didn't know about the very detrimental impact of childhood adversity on adult lives before the film was made. Researchers and psychotherapists and criminologists and many others have known about this for decades. But only now, thanks in large part to this film, is it actually properly coming into the public domain. And the knowledge is catching fire, it's having an impact, and there is a sense of momentum actually right across the country, especially in Scotland, Wales, and a sense of hope that we might actually be able to put in place something right across the UK, something that will actually make a real difference. So I'm going to introduce my panel. Is this actually working, or is it just my voice? Can you all hear me? Good. I'm going to start with Shabira on my left. Shabira Papain is the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy CEO of a national charity called Best Beginnings. I have to just make a quick confession. I don't know whether Shabira knows this, but in the brochure that you've all got, I made her the CEO. So you'll have to explain to Alison, I'm really sorry. She is the Deputy CEO, a very important one. And she's also a trustee of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance, working to drive progress in perinatal mental health. Now, Best Beginnings, for those of you who may not know, is doing what this film doesn't altogether address, and that is getting in at the very beginning, before the child is born, and doing primary prevention. Founded 12 years ago by Alison Bohm, a science graduate who went on to work at the BBC on programs like Horizon and Tomorrow's World, communicating key scientific and medical breakthroughs. Using digital technology and over 300 short films, free and accessible on a mobile phone, Best Beginnings has already reached over 2 million families during its first decade of existence. I'm going to introduce Sarah next. Sarah Temple is a GP working in Somerset with a special interest in neurodevelopment and the link between emotional, mental, and physical health. She has more than 25 years' experience working with children and young people, both within general practice and child and adolescent mental health services. The central premise of Sarah's approach is a belief that by increasing awareness of the effects of toxic stress on human development, and by building skills in emotion regulation, we can work together to reduce intergenerational cycles of childhood adversity. Sarah's social enterprise, ECAP Limited, is currently commissioned by both Somerset County Council and Somerset Clinical Commissioning Group to cascade mindful emotion coaching through the children and young people's workforce. And last but not least, who's here tonight, I come to the fourth member, well, not actually, it's the third member, we're not sure if we're going to get George yet. Vince Cable. So Vince Cable, thank you for coming here tonight. I'm sure he needs no introduction to 99% of the people in this audience. Vince, MP for Twickenham, Teddington, the Hamptons and Whitton, and leader of the Liberal Democrat Party. Thank you very much for coming to support this event tonight, especially when it was hot on the heels of your party conference in Brighton. When I first went to see Vince about 12 months ago and asked if he would endorse the Wave Trust campaign to reduce child maltreatment, he looked quite seriously through a rather large bundle of things that I presented him with. But he paused briefly to read some statistics for Richmond to do with mental health of young people. And without hesitation, he said, "Yes, of course I will, and what would you like me to do?" So thank you for that offer, Vince. I really appreciated it and do now. A few months later, all 12 Liberal Democrat MPs had endorsed the campaign. Now, are we getting George? Can we say hello to George? George, hello.
I hope you are. I'm certainly getting you.
Oh, George, it's lovely to see you. But I mean, you know, I wish you were here in person, but great that we have a connection.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to join you in spite of the attempts of Storms and British Airways to prevent me from getting there.
Well, now I'm going to introduce you, George Hosking, economist, accountant, psychologist, and clinical criminologist. He is also founder and CEO of the charity Wave Trust. Before focusing on social issues, George had a successful career in business, working in the field of international strategy. Now, over 20 years ago, George and his team at Wave, for the past 20 years, should I say, have brought together the best of international understanding of the root causes of violence and sought to identify global best practice to create preventive solutions. Now, a large part of Wave's work is about influencing public policy to effect change. It has initiated 2 cross-parliamentary groups in Westminster. One is called the First 1001 Days, because it refers to the fact that the crucial period in the formation of the emotional brain is during the first 1001 days of life, from conception to age 2. Damage caused to neural pathways during this time through sustained stress and trauma is difficult to reverse. The emotional and physical impact can be lifelong, as we have seen so clearly in this film. Now, Wave also set up a national campaign 2 years ago with this goal, as I mentioned, of reducing child maltreatment by 70% by 2030. And it is currently coordinating a nationwide project to create trauma-informed communities. George was awarded the OBE in June 2014 for services to reducing violence, particularly child abuse. That's the end of the introduction. And now to the film, and hopefully some questions and comments from the audience. But I'm going to start off just by addressing a couple of questions to the panel so that they have a chance to put their perspective on the film in the context of the work that they do. And after that, I want to hear what you all think about the film and whether it has any resonance for you in your particular work. So the first question is this: having just watched the film, can I ask each of you to describe what stood out most for you in the context of your own particular interest and work? This could be something that touched you or surprised you. It could be something that inspired you. And it could even be something that's missing from the film. So Sarah, would you like to start?
Thank you, Daphne. So I'm already running a project in Somerset where we have been training staff around something called attachment awareness, which is a concept many of you may already be familiar with. And what I found with this film is an additional clarity for that. So we're in the process of changing our training materials now so that we are clearer about the effects of toxic stress on human development in terms of brain architecture, immune system, also hormonal systems and genetic expression. So we're really putting that much more clearly in our training. And the other thing that our staff and schools that we work with are saying is that the clarity over the fact that it's the amount of exposure to adverse childhood experience rather than particular types that lead to the changes. So the scoring system has been really powerful for use in schools and other organisations that we're with. Does that make sense?
So are you saying that the scoring of ACEs, people being aware of their ACEs, is a really good thing?
We do run, with groups that we're working with, staff that we're working with, we do a similar thing to ANDA. So we will ask them to complete a questionnaire around the 10 questions for ACEs. And what we find is that we've devised a system using an IT solution for people to be able to give completely confidential replies, and then the scoring comes up on a graph on the screen. And what we find is it enables inclusivity, so that staff are then more able to see that adverse childhood experience is something that's common to all of us, rather than something that's over there and out there. So what we're looking at is reducing exclusions in schools, so we're encouraging that concept of inclusivity through, and it's been a very useful tool for that.
Good, yes. Vince, would you like to have any reactions from you to this film?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that struck me, and I suppose most people in the audience, was this, very powerful epidemiological study. These correlations of extraordinary, striking about not just life expectancy, but prison and many other things.
Did they surprise you, or would you?
Yes, I mean, in a way, I think about the film and the numbers, was in a way we all understand this anyway.
Yes.
I mean, there's long been a discussion about cycles of deprivation, and early intervention is part of the orthodoxy of the way social services should be run, for example. But I suppose the main conclusion and the main policy implication is in terms of public health, preventive health policy, which we say so in a ritualistic kind of way, but it doesn't really happen. I mean, the overwhelming bulk of our much-loved health service goes into caring for old people, and I don't know, 80–90% of the money goes on elderly people who are physically or mentally frail, and very little goes into thinking about young people and having preventive services for them. I mean, in parts of the country where I've seen social prescribing in action, which is proper public health policy, it tends to be elderly people turning up with aches and pains and worrying about their heart, and instead of being given drugs, they're sent off to work in an allotment or told to stop drinking or going for a regular walk, the kind of thing people will, in this audience, I guess, will do automatically. But not too much attention to children, and I guess this is what's important here. I think the one point, the one experiment in the UK which is quite revealing is the Glasgow project. I don't know how well aware you are of it, but this is an attempt to deal with knife crime, and public health is a key element in that. Now, and how much of this they've actually borrowed, I don't know, but certainly screening, the screening tests, the health visitors coming to homes, things of this kind, and it has clearly made a difference. I mean, I speak with some feeling, because I started my political life not in this borough, but in a tough working class ward in Glasgow, which I represented. And the thing about Glasgow was, it wasn't, well then anyway, was the poorest city in Britain by a long way. And there was this extraordinary gradient in life expectancy between the bit,
and I mean, that's been pointed out in so many places,
and up the road in these posh suburbs. And I've been back, 40 years later, it's still there, nothing really has changed. But they are working hard now on, preventive work with young people and deprived families, and it has apparently made a big difference to the incidence of knife crime. I mean, the famous Glasgow
the violence, was it the VRU, is it the Violence Reduction Unit in Glasgow?
Yeah,
it was probably one of the first places to, or police forces to have a sort of trauma-informed approach, I think.
Yeah.
Can I move on to Shabira and get your view, Shabira, on on the film.
Yes. So you said missing, touched, or inspired. So
Yes.
I got one for each because I was scribbling away while I was watching.
Right.
The film, like on a personal note, it was really touching. Some bits were really hard for me to watch. I've had many, like most people in here, now that we found out, I'm not alone in having adverse childhood experiences, and I sometimes feel really weighed down by having that lived experience, and today was very freeing, watching them, do it in a room and everyone's going, I was 2 weeks ago in a conference on diversity on maternal mental health, and the whole day was all these statistics about how people who look like me, who sound like me, who live in boroughs like I do in Newham are more likely to have X, Y, and Z, and nothing was positive about it. It was very much we were a statistic, yet we weren't there from leadership, and this film kind of blew it away. And it showed us how we could be doing things and how we're all coming from the same hymn sheet. So it was very life-affirming for me because I was sitting on the way here. I came with some colleagues and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can own my lived experience today. I'm not sure in Twickenham if it's going to go down. And I think it's going to go down well. So I've named it and it's on there because I know you're with me anyway in spirit. So what I was really touched by was the power of lived experience in practice, and it's something we don't see enough, not in the UK, and I don't think we see enough of it in Australia. I grew up in Australia and very much always looking at how we're working with Indigenous communities, because if we can get it right with Indigenous communities who are way disenfranchised, much more than some of the other communities we have here, then I think we can get it right everywhere. What I mean about that lived experience is that nurse that went into that mum's home and she used her lived experience to be able to enrich her practice. It wasn't so she could be more sympathetic and empathetic out in the world. It was to do with her practice. We saw it in action, and so she was able to be there. She could hold her own experience and not pretend it didn't happen, but she didn't use her experience and it get in the way of her working with that mum. And it's something here that we find it very hard when it comes to actual practice, using and empowering that lived experience to be in that space. We tend to just wheel out the lived experience. We'd sit here and we'd go, now we're going to have the lived experience voice come and tell us what it's like for them. We never have it in practice. So that was very touching. What I was inspired by was the comment about inventing wise actions from that practitioner who said, well, actually, because I'm going on about it all the time, my colleagues will vouch for it, it's not good enough that we use public money to have academic research that just stays in academia, and it stays with people like you and me who can understand the language, and we can interpret it, and we make our livings from it. It's not enough, and we need to make sure that we find ways of getting all this content that we've seen today and all the other research out into the public domain, because it's made with public money. It's commissioned by public money and it's owned by local communities, and we need to find ways of making sure that those local communities know, because knowledge is power, and that's how we can start to transform. And the missing, it was only said once in the film, was, for me, it's about racism and being able to, yes, we've all got lots of adverse childhood experiences and we'd have some shared experience, but inequalities, and at the heart of that lays racism, is everybody's business. And that, for me, was the bit that's missing, that wasn't explored enough, because those kids living in Newham are not having the same life chances as the kids living and growing up in some parts of where we are right now. And part of that is not just the adverse childhood experiences relating to parental abuse or maltreatment. It sits at the heart of racism.
Thank you very much, Shabira. George, we're coming to you. Can you still hear us?
Yes.
Do you remember the
First
question?
let me tell you, I love this film. I've probably seen it now about 40 times, and I'm not bored any time that I look at it. Every time I look at it, I see something fresh, and I find it just so inspiring. I first saw it last September in Glasgow in an audience of 300 people, one of whom was Nicola Sturgeon, and she stood up at the end of the film and she said, this film is so important, I want every single MSP in the Scottish Parliament to see it. And it was shown to the MSPs in the Scottish Parliament in January of this year, and it's been shown to over 400 civil servants in the Scottish Parliament. It's a very, very powerful message that seems to resonate with audiences all over the UK and has been wonderful for us in terms of building support for our solutions, which we believe we have to these problems. In terms of what struck me most about the film, however, right at the beginning, or actually just exactly 10 minutes in from the film, there is a screenshot which shows that only 5% of health spending in the United States is spent on prevention. And I only know of one UK study, it's carried out in the northwest of England 7 or 8 years ago, which has analysed the percentage of spending going on prevention, and the answer it came up with was 3%. So whether it's 3% or 5%, and I think it's a number that's been falling in recent years, we don't spend nearly enough money in this country on prevention. So that was one of the most striking things about the film. The other thing that strikes me about the film, and I'm sorry to come up with a negative about a film I love so much, is that apart from that, it almost says nothing about prevention in a 1-hour film. It's a really great film about part of the solution to people who've already suffered ACEs, which is trauma-informed care and trauma-informed communities. And as Daphne knows, Wayne is committed to setting up 36 new trauma-informed communities around the UK over the next 3 years. And I've been working with the one we're setting up in Glasgow over the last couple of days. But dealing with it after the event is only part of the solution. We like to use the analogy in Wave that there is a bath which is overflowing with massive social problems, and we spend billions of pounds in this country mopping up the floods created by that bath, and we don't spend money turning off the taps. That's what prevention does, primary prevention at the beginning of life, and that's where we need to spend money. So that's what I would like to have seen in the film that isn't there.
Thank you, George, very much. Just following on from that, we're going to have to move quite quickly because we are very behind time. I just want to quote something from the film, which Jack Shonkoff, Professor Jack Shonkoff said. He said, if we want to produce dramatic impacts on the life outcomes of children experiencing toxic stress, we have to transform the lives of the parents who are looking after them. We can't just tell them to be better parents. We need to build their capabilities as people, such as planning, monitoring, problem solving, impulse control. It is, as he said in the film, about human capital investment. Discuss. Over to you, the audience. Would anyone like to give us their reflections on the film, anything that struck you? We have 2 people, I believe, have we, with microphones. So if you'd like to put up your hand, I see one up there on at the left-hand side, the back. Is there another one we can get a mic to? And can I just, before you start, I should have said this at the beginning, just if you wouldn't mind saying your name before you ask your question or make a comment, and also if you could just indicate whether you're speaking from a professional standpoint or tell us. Thank you.
Shall I respond? Is
Yes.
this on?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Okay, my name is Heather Geddes, and I'm an educational psychotherapist and have worked for years in the area of kids in school, their behaviour and achievement and the issues affecting that. And what I'm most compelled by is the mention of prevention, because one of the biggest tools in prevention is the awareness and understanding that exists in schools and the way that they respond to the behaviour as a communication rather than as a punishment and a neglect. So I would be interested in knowing what Vince Mr. Cable might have in mind as a policy locally, because the cuts in the education services are having a catastrophic effect on the capacity of local schools to support the most vulnerable pupils. And I've been talking to people in the system, and they really are very, very disadvantaged in terms of their capacity to intervene and support for these children. So I'd be interested in knowing what local policy might do to change the existing system in Richmond, was, as you can imagine, is particularly poor?
Well, specifically on schools, the scope for local intervention is very limited because, as you know, the school system has been very centralised. I mean, it's directly under government control. Even very minor decisions have to go up to ministers these days. They're not resolved by the school, let alone the local authority. But one point I would want to stress is that I mean, there is a very real problem in local schools of mental illness, child mental illness. I've tried since I got back re-elected, I've tried to get around all the local schools on the Twickenham side, and I've been around to all except 2 or 3. And at a secondary level, you're probably talking about an incidence of 1 in 4 who are regarded by their staff or head teachers as stressed or having mental illness situation. Now, some of these are teenage-related, you know, puberty, bullying by social media, stress of exams, this kind of thing. But in many cases, it's deeper. And the thing that made the biggest impression on me was actually going to a primary school. It was a very cosy little Church of England primary, and it looked so placid on the surface and contented. And I asked the head teacher if he had any problems, and he said, well, you know, you look around these kids, actually, I would say at least 1 in 10, and these are, you know, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, have quite serious mental illness problems. And even at that very early stage, and of course many of them are related to childhood experiences. But on the broader question, of course, you're right. I mean, there is a funding issue for schools. It's been cut in real terms, and one of the practical consequences of it is that things that local schools used to take a certain pride in, like, for example, doing well with children with special needs. I mean, for example, Orleans made a virtue of its success in this area. The schools are now very reluctant to take on pupils with special problems because they lose money by doing so. The funding stream is not adequate, and they have to survive financially and try and avoid making teachers and assistants redundant. And very often what happens is that the children with special requirements are just being shunted aside or pushed from one school to another. So, you know, funding is really a serious issue locally.
Yes. Thank you, Vince. I mean, we could spend a whole evening discussing these political issues around the subject, and we'll have to sort of leave that there at the moment. But you're absolutely right, Vince. It's such a problem for schools, and I know from talking to head teachers as well. Any more comments? Because anyone burning to say something here now? Yes, here's someone just down here.
Hi, my name's Alex Doig. I work in the Child Mental Health Services in Richmond. I know Richmond has the highest rate of substance misuse for young people in London. It's also, compared to other boroughs in London, got a higher than average rate of child and adolescent self-harm. Bearing in mind, despite the affluence of the borough, there's quite a high need in terms of child and adolescent mental health services. A lot of the helpful factors that the film highlighted in terms of early intervention have been reduced in the borough. So youth services have reduced, health visitors, school nurses, child and adolescent mental health services. You know, unfortunately, we don't even have the capacity to deal with the increasing demand, 10% rise year on year in child and adolescent mental health difficulties. So bearing in mind there is no money, with the NHS spending so much money on elderly care, what the film highlighted is early intervention in childhood could reduce that burden. How could we, A, look at how we can redistribute some of that funding to focus on prevention and supporting building resilience in young people, but also be very interested in the panels how they found ways, aside from funding, in being able to implement some of these sort of early interventions, sort of preventative work that may not require any additional funding.
Sarah, would you like to have a go at answering that?
Yeah, I'll just quickly, I think there is learning for all of us in public services from this work, particularly in that if we take the scientific concept that it's the amount of exposure to stress that causes the biological effect in terms of behaviour, learning difficulties, health outcomes, etc., then we could start looking at doing less assessment, because the assessment, after all, is simply the level of exposure, if you like, and then put the money that we're currently using within early help services for assessing and deciding on tiers that children fit into, to actually work with families. So I think, for me, part of what's coming out of this is, you know, we've been saying, haven't we, for years, that when we work together across services and with the community, we come up with better solutions. And we need to do more of that. And we need to do more of looking for solutions outside services, innovative solutions like that, Miss Kendra's list, using drama therapists to come in. They're part of the community. They come in and they work and they're giving a strong, clear message. It's a different way of using the money. Does that make sense?
Can I add to that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, of course, do.
So that's still slightly clinical, that's still professional-led, and so the community development hat over here is going to go, but the community. And so actually, instead of just distributing money that's already in a system, using different systems. So there is money in other systems that we can now appropriate and say, look, we've got really good evidence, and we know that parents are going to back this, because no parent starts off pregnant going, don't really care what's going to happen to this little one. Don't care if they don't go to school, don't care if, no one starts off. We always have the best intentions. We want to quit smoking, we want to lose the weight, we want them to be healthy, and we want them to reach their full potential. So we've got to capitalise on that. And so there are ways using, you know, other resources like big lottery funding. You know, we are so lucky in this country. We have 400 years of a voluntary sector. Other countries don't have this. We don't have this in Australia. The only way you can run a community project is going through some huge, big central government funding, and so the little organisations never get the money to do the amazing stuff that we get to do in this country on the ground. So we need to stop only responding to these problems by saying the services need to do it, NHS needs, we need more money, and what's going to happen, only the education sector can do it. We've got a voluntary sector that's strong and vibrant and dynamic and creative, and they have access to those people on the ground who need it the most. We don't at national, the grassroots organisations do. So we need to find a way of making sure we distill this knowledge and distill it down to communities, and accessing funding to do something with this, and not coming up and reinventing the wheel ourselves all the time, which is a curse of the sector. We think we have to always reinvent it, so that commissioner gives us the money. It's coming together, working in partnerships across, so thinking nationally, building it down locally, and making sure we use other resources to do it.
Shabira, I think you're absolutely on the money there. And it was partly my thinking in trying to get so many different sectors to come to this screening tonight, because I think if we could create a forum where the sectors really come together, but actually including community, including people who aren't the professionals, because I think something is required, like a cultural shift, I think, in our understanding of things, and actually not, I get the impression there's a slight reluctance to really lay it on the table how it is. You know, even in our antenatal education, it's sort of like, well, we'll catch the ones who we think are at risk and we'll sort of try and help them. But, you know, it's a little bit sort of gently. We don't want to scare them off about all these dreadful things and how hard it is going to be a parent. So that's just one sense. I think community definitely needs to come together and find some solutions. George.
Yes, this financial issue, of course, is one that always rears its head. There is a huge amount of evidence that shows that if you invest in the early years, and especially in prevention, it saves money. I could quote Public Health England, who've produced quite a bit of material on this, Early Intervention Foundation, innumerable American studies, but also certain local authorities like Essex and Gloucestershire have invested money in early years and prevention, and actually report that it has saved them money by doing so. It is, of course, a challenge because of the huge cuts that are taking place. But at one point, it's really come home to me in the last couple of years, and I recommend to anyone in this audience who's interested in the research, reading a report that's on Wave's website, written by my colleague Ita Walsh. It's called Age 2 to 18, Systems to Protect Children from Disadvantage. And it actually talks about the Vanguard approach. And the Vanguard approach, which has been used very successfully in local authorities like at Staffordshire and Portsmouth, actually shows that you can save very significant amounts of money in local areas in health, police, housing, and local authorities around the UK by completely changing the model from one of delivery of services to one of meeting the needs of the ordinary citizens on the ground. And that might seem incredibly obvious, but it's not generally what happens in local authorities. But don't believe me, read what Isha's written about that in her report. But I've seen that at work in practice. And before I became a clinical criminologist, I was a corporate turnaround specialist in multinational business. And I've looked at the Vanguard approach, and I believe it could work for any local authority. The other thing is that there have been studies such as the Christie Commission in Scotland, which have shown that 40% of public spending is only necessary because we don't intervene early enough in the development of problems that are taking place. So as long as we continue on our present pathway, we are going to have local authorities and health boards under financial pressure because we're not turning off the taps, we're constantly mopping up the floods. So I'll just mention one last point that I think is crucial. The government departments that save money from prevention are departments like work and pensions, local government, home office, and justice and education. The department which has to spend the money to prevent problems at the beginning of life is health. So the department being asked to spend the money is not the one that's getting the benefits. And that militates against them investing in prevention. And there could be a mechanism set up whereby actually all the departments who benefit contribute to a central fund for prevention and produce benefits of this. And a former cabinet minister has laid out a mechanism that would deliver this. So it's something that I think it has got to be part of the solution, but it can be done, and we can fund prevention and actually reduce everyone's taxes in doing so.
Thank you, George, very much. We have passed 8 p.m. Do I have your permission to extend for another 10 minutes? Yeah. Anyone desperate to leave? I'm sorry, we have now there's someone who'd like to say something here in the middle of row C. Someone got a microphone, please. Oh, right. Is someone there? Right. And the next one is going to be here. Could someone bring a microphone there, please? To the middle of row C, I think it is. What's your question or comment?
It's is this on?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. It's an observation and a coalition of ideas. So my name is Romany. I'm part of the voluntary community sector and pulled together a community organisation called Send Family Voices, which supports families of peer support for families of children with special educational needs. And it was an observation on a number of points made. One is around lived experiences and parents as professionals, because you said earlier that getting people involved who weren't just the professionals, but the families themselves are professionals, which ties in with the lived experiences. And it's actually really empowering and really difficult to do. And my experiences in the world of special educational needs, and a lot of these families are managing within a system that I would describe as functionally abusive, and are then seen as exterior to their family's problems. So that there's something in there about, in this room full of professionals, the parents and the families are equal, and yet it's such a hard thing to do and very empowering at the same time. I've also done quite a lot of work with the CCG commissioners in terms of children's and young people's mental health. And one of the things I'd like to say is it's really marked how keen and enthusiastic, yes, families are, but young people themselves. So when I start to work directly with young people, and I do this as a parent and as a volunteer,
there is no shortage of my friends or my network or the wider networks, young people putting their hands up going, yeah, this has happened to my mate, I really want to get involved in this. So it's really an observation based on what I've seen and heard tonight.
Thank you very much, Romany. That's very, very encouraging. We've got someone here in the third row.
Can you hear? Is it working? I've very much enjoyed this meeting. My name's Emma Mensa. I'm a consultant obstetrician and I'm a maternal medicine specialist. So I look after women who aren't well. So normal pregnancy isn't my field. It's women who aren't well. And what struck me about this film is actually the relationship that was built between the counsellor who's had her own lived experience and was improving the life of the mother who's had, you know, the short-haired girl. And what I could see in that was building experience. And because I'm an obstetrician, I was thinking the next time she's pregnant, things will be different. And, you know, I was surprised, actually, there wasn't more mention of the 1,000 days, because I think certainly in the medical profession, as an obstetrician, we kind of think, oh, I was just saying, it's all done by 2 years of age. And that can induce a sort of a sense of helplessness, in the sense of by the time children have got to 4 or 5 years old, has it all been done? But what that relationship did for that mother, if she has a child again, she's going to play a role in the life of her child. Because if you imagine, I mean, people who live in these dire situations, in difficult circumstances where there aren't many life chances, well, they know that. They read the papers. They know. How must it feel to be a mother thinking, you're going to have a child in this circumstance? What's going to happen to my child? There's been a sort of passivity. But the 1,001 days ethos has given power back to the mothers. Because as a high-risk obstetrician, I'm dealing with the mother's heart or her kidneys, and our contract has been so medical, and she submits to what I suggest for her, because that way the baby will grow well and come out physically well. But what we're starting to do now is to remind her, in amongst all that medication, to still talk to her baby, to sing to her baby in her language, to just do things that only she can do, because that's going to improve the mental health of her child when it comes. And we haven't had that. It's very paternalistic medicine. You come to the doctors and you do as you're told. And the point about that 1,001 days is that baby's within that mother's body. She is in charge of how that baby will do. I can give advice so that she's not in heart failure by the time she delivers, but in terms of the beginning of that baby's life, it's back in her control. And you know, the medical world and all the experts in this room need to really actually have more emphasis on those first days, the first 9 months when that child can't be touched by anybody, but is under the influence of that of the woman. And it isn't the norm for us to, it wasn't the norm for me in my clinics to say, by the way, are you talking to your baby? Are you playing music? Are you singing to your baby in your language? I mean, I never said that, but I am starting to say it much, much more. And it's amazing what it does for those women, because they come with their list of medications and telling me what they're doing. And for me to ask them, are you doing that? And to be thrilled when they are, it creates much more of a healthy relationship. And of course, those first 9 months is a huge time for development for those babies. So the film was inspiring, but as an obstetrician, I was thinking of that mother having her next baby and how much better she would be doing that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Yes. Shabira is going to say something now.
To build on what you said, was your name Anna? And so at Best Beginnings, we have, it's exactly that. So the first 1,001 days, there's a whole paper around it. If you're from the education background, you're like, what are we talking about? And it's about births, and it's about this critical window of opportunity in those first 1,001 days. And so we at Best Beginnings, if you don't have that amazing obstetrician and you're not high risk, then you're not going to get Anna as your doctor who's going to ask you that. Then it becomes a postcard lottery in this country about what kind of practitioner you have. That's not just going to see you for, you know, in terms of the medical model, but is going to help you to think through actually what could I be doing in those first 1,001 days. So we have a Baby Buddy app, and Baby Buddy is like your digital best friend. It's a funky app, but really it's a public health intervention. And what we do, because technology doesn't do itself, it's freely available on the App Store or on Google Play, is we work with multidisciplinary teams across the country to integrate the app into the care pathway. And the way the app was founded is to think about how do we give the agency the power back to that mum, back to that family, so they have the in-time information on the palm of their hands. So if you don't get that professional that tells you, have you been talking to your baby and have you been doing X, Y, and Z, are you reading to your child, whatever it is in terms of cognitive development, that every parent has that access to information so they really can give their child the best start in life. And so it goes back to literacy and the kind of early years and health literacy that we need to be thinking about. And that's much more cost effective than, then giving them counselling or that post-traumatic stress, over here. We still need the clinical, don't get me wrong, Sarah, I'm not bagging the clinical. I think it's really, really important. And I've personally accessed a lot of that. It's seeing what are the cost-effective ways that we can be doing it. And we need to use digital tools as well, because the next generation of mums, they're Googling and they're going on parent chat groups and one's going, don't worry about it, my child was fine. I was in domestic violence and it was cool. And maybe it is going to be cool. I'm a product of, if you've got a loving adult in your life, we can overcome. So it's not all dire if we don't talk to the baby. Those first 1,001 days are critical, but they're not the end of the world either. But how do we get that information? And so there are other ways that can be cost effective as well, going back to that question. And we need to embrace digital in the way we're working too, not replacing professionals. It needs to be in conjunction with, and that's why we integrate it. So it's still the power of that communication between that early years staff member or that health professional to bridge the gap and make sure when that parent walks out, they still have the information in the palm of their hand.
Now, sadly, I'm going to have to draw this to a close. I know there's probably much more we could say, but I hope we've made a start here in Richmond of having a conversation. My ambition for this evening is that the film will provide a sort of common language, a common understanding, which will not only cross disciplinary boundaries, but that it will include the general public. We all have an interest in this because it's our society, it's our communities, it's our parents, it's our children. So let's be ambitious and not accept as inevitable that some people are going to be miserable, some people are going to be depressed, some people are going to be violent. It's not necessary. These cases should be rare, not the devastating statistics that we're faced with every day. There are just three things I believe we need to keep in the front of our minds. What do children need in order to thrive? What do children and young people need who have had a bad start in life and who may have a difficult home life? And thirdly, what do parents need in order to be better placed to give their children and young people what they need? Now, the answer to all these three questions might have something to do with time. More time for relationships. Life has become very crowded. And how as a community are we going to deliver this? I think we need to talk more and work it out. There should be a way. I would like to end with a quote, actually, from something that Robert Anders said, if I can find it here amongst my bits of paper. He said, ACEs are highly predictive of our nation's worst health and social problems. The good news is that what is predictable is preventable. But we don't seem to be able to generate enough funding for services and systems to adequately address the scale of the problem. And even if we could, that might not be the answer. Perhaps people have to solve it themselves by a cultural shift in understanding. Any approach to a major public health problem must necessarily include broad-based education. In fact, an informed public is often the major driving force for change. So with that, I shall close our evening, and thank you all very, very much for coming.